As you already know, the human nervous system regulates many body activities. However, another important system helps regulate life functions. It is the endocrine system. The changes affected by endocrine system are more gradual than the changes made by the nervous system. The endocrine system consists of endocrine glands that secrete chemicals called hormones directly into the bloodstream. Sometimes endocrine glands are called ductless glands. The organs of the endocrine system perform the same general function as nervous system: communication, integration, and control. The nervous system provides rapid, brief control by fast-traveling nerve impulses. The endocrine system provides slow but longer-lasting control by secretion of hormones. For example, secretion of growth hormone controls the rate of development over long periods of gradual growth. Even though the blood carries the hormones throughout the body, each hormone can influence the action only over target cells. Target cells contain receptor for specific hormone. Target cells often located at the distance of the body from the endocrine glands that produce the hormones that affect them. The endocrine glands secrete hormone directly into the bloodstream. These glands are located in different parts of the body. Some specialized cells also secrete hormones and are considered as an endocrine glands. The endocrine glands regulate themselves with the types of multi-step feedback mechanism. There are two types of feedback mechanisms that work on the human endocrine system. If the end product steps the first step, it is called negative feedback. In negative feedback, the end product stops the product of a particular hormone. Positive feedback occurs when the end product is needed in order for the first step in the series to begin. Negative feedback is used by most endocrine glands. Here is a good example how calcitonin controls a level of the calcium in our body. So let's start. Look, the level of calcitonin goes up. What's happening to the level of the calcium? Level of the calcium goes down. When level of the calcium goes down, level of the calcitonin goes down. And then if the level of calcitonin goes down, the concentration of the calcium increases. And when the concentration calcium increases, the level of calcitonin goes up. And the level of calcium goes down again. Isn't it a beautiful system of control? The thyroid is a two-lobed gland located in the neck. The thyroid gland produces the hormone thyroxine. Thyroxine helps regulate body's growth and metabolism. Sometimes the thyroid gland produces too much thyroxine, and the individual develops a condition called hypothyroidism. Hypothyroidism. People with this condition usually have high blood pressure and overactive metabolism. If the thyroid gland produces too little thyroxine, the individual is said to have hypothyroidism. These people tire easily and often overweight. If we're going to look at more conditions that people with hypothyroidism go through, we should note that they have cold intolerance, weight gain, decreased sweating, constipation, depression or irritability. In females, irregular and heavy periods, slow heart rate, brittle nails, muscle or joint pain, puffy face. People with hyperthyroidism have weight loss or gain. In females, short and light periods, increased sweating, puffy bulging eyes, nail thickening and flaking, heat intolerance, racing heart, nervousness and anxiety, muscle weakness, diarrhea. In both of these people, either with hyperthyroidism or hyperthyroidism, they both have fatigue, have insomnia, and hair loss. If a baby has an underactive thyroid gland, he or she may develop a condition called cretinism. Cretinism stunts child's growth and causes mental retardation. If the condition diagnosed early, it can be corrected. Another problem occurs in thyroid gland when an individual's diet is deficient in iodine. Because of the thyroid needs iodine to produce thyroxine, abnormal growth of thyroid tissue can occur, producing an enlarged thyroid called goiter. Goiters are rare today, largely due to the addition of iodine to table salt. There are 4 parathyroid glands located in the back of the thyroid gland. The parathyroid glands secrete parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid hormone helps control the levels of calcium in the blood. This hormone is very important in the formation of bones and in controlling the proper functioning of nerves and muscles. An adrenal gland is located on the top of each kidney. Each adrenal gland has an inner layer and outer layer. The inner layer is called medulla. The adrenal medulla produces 2 fascinating hormones, epinephrine and norepinephrine. You may have heard them called adrenaline and noradrenaline. Adrenaline is actually an old trade name for epinephrine, coined by pharmaceutical companies. These hormones cause very specific changes in the body, usually in response to stress. It reduces blood flow in the capillaries near the body surfaces, causing the skin to pale, reducing the extent of bleeding. The blood is instead diverted to the muscles, which may need to perform some strenuous deed, like getting you out of there. At such times, digestive function ceases, blood pressure increases, and glucose is suddenly released into the bloodstream from the liver. All these responses, of course, are brought on by sudden fright or anger. They are often called flight or fight responses. Note that in general, the system readies the animal or human for emergency. The muscles receive the bulk of the blood flow. Glucose reserves are mobilized, and unneeded functions are shut down. We have all heard stories of people exhibiting supernatural feats of strength at these times. We have all heard of the little old lady lifting the car of her husband, or you may remember feeling the effects yourself. So one asks, just how does the adrenal medulla mediate all these responses? We haven't the foggiest. Part of the problem is that the data are confusing. For example, all these responses can be induced in animals that have had the adrenal medulla removed. What this seems to mean is that the adrenal medulla has counterpart elsewhere. This is perhaps quite simply the sympathetic nervous system, since in fact all the neurons of the sympathetic nervous system secrete noradrenaline as a neurotransmitter. And so we assume that endocrine system in this case is a redundant system, backing up the neural cortex, presumably lowering the excitation thresholds of the sympathetic synapses. For now, we have no other explanation for the 2 systems carrying out the same function. The outer layer of adrenal gland is called the cortex. The cortex produces corticosteroids and aldosterone. Corticosteroids or corticoids influence the metabolism of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Aldosterone helps control the balance of water and salts in the body. The pituitary gland is a relatively small structure located at the base of the brain. The pituitary gland is divided into anterior lobe and posterior lobe. The anterior lobe secreted a number of hormones, including growth hormone, which stimulates the growth of bones in the body. If too much growth hormone secreted during the growth years, the individual will grow much taller than normal. Too much growth hormone produced in an adult will cause the bones in the face and hands to thicken. This condition is called acromegaly. Acromegaly and its counterpart gigantism are rare condition caused by excessive production of growth hormone, which stimulates the growth of the skeleton and all the tissue in the body. A tumor in the pituitary gland can secrete uncontrolled amounts of growth hormones. Pituitary tumors are benign, can vary in size, and develop at any time through life. In a child, when too little growth hormone is released, a condition called dwarfism occurs. The child remains short. A dwarf is a person of short stature under 4'10" as an adult. Many conditions can cause dwarfism, but achondroplasia causes about 70%. Achondroplasia is a genetic bone disorder affecting 1 in 20,000 babies. It is the most common type of dwarfism in which the child's arms and legs are short in proportion to body length. The head is often large and the trunk is normal size. But there are other hormones that are produced in the interior lobe of the pituitary, not just a growth hormone. One of them is adrenocorticotrophic hormone. Adrenocorticotrophic hormone acts on the adrenal cortex. It stimulates the adrenal cortex to increase in size and to secrete larger amounts of hormones, especially cortisol, also known as hydrocortisone. It also regulates the metabolism of fats. Under its influence, the body releases fatty acids into our bloodstream for redistribution throughout the organism. Another one is a thyroid stimulating hormone. It is responsible for stimulating the thyroid gland to release its hormones. These hormones regulate the metabolic rate of the body and calcium ion levels of the blood. Prolactin promotes milk production in mammals, including humans. Towards very end of pregnancy, the blood levels of prolactin increase to 28 times. That is in non-pregnant females. But milk still is not produced because it is inhibited by high estrogen and progesterone levels. When this fall off dramatically at birth, the milk flow begins, in part under the influence of oxytocin from the posterior pituitary. Continuing high levels of prolactin permit a woman to produce milk for very long periods, perhaps 3 years after the birth of a child. Milk production stops, however, when the child stops nursing, since suckling directly stimulates continued secretion of the hormone. Prolactin may also be involved in other activities which we know even less about. For example, it is present in males and infants, but we cannot imagine what it does in either case. Recent studies also reveal that prolactin rises in both males and females during sexual excitement, peaking at orgasm. Again, we do not know why. Other hormones released by anterior lobe of the pituitary gland include luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone. Luteinizing causes the secretion of the sex hormones by the testes and ovaries. Follicle-stimulating hormone influences the maturing of eggs and production of sperm. Since we just talked about 6 organs and information might be overwhelming, let's review by asking questions. What are the target organs of the anterior pituitary hormones? Or let's be more specific, what is a target organ of adrenocorticotrophic hormone, known as ACTH? The answer is adrenal cortex. What are the target organ of the growth hormone, GH? The answer, of course, muscles and bones. So the next question, what is a target organ of thyroid stimulating hormone? Or should I ask the question? That's quite obvious, right? Thyroid gland, of course. So the next question, what are the target organs of gonadotropins? What are gonadotropins? Luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. The answer is ovaries and testes. Another question is, what are the target organ of the prolactin? And the answer is breast. Now, as you could see, the hormones conveniently have names of the organs they act upon. So, for example, the first one, adrenocorticotrophic hormone. Here is the organ that acts on the cortex of the adrenal gland. Now, follicle-stimulated hormone. Here, the of ovaries and testes that this hormone is acting upon. Prolactin, lactin is milk, mammillary glands, breast, right? So it's acting on the mammillary glands of the breast. Actually, prolactin, the function of the prolactin is to initiate milk production, right? That's what it is responsible for. Growth hormone, well, it comes by the common sense, right? What is growing in our body? Of course, bones and muscles. The only two hormones we know that are stored in the posterior pituitary are short peptides, oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone, each in a chain of only 9 amino acids, and they are remarkably similar, differing from each other only in 2 links of the chain. Both hormones are manufactured in the neural cell bodies of the hypothalamus and travel down the posterior pituitary inside the axons of those cells. They are released by the variety of factors. Some we know and some we don't. Antidiuretic hormones, for instance, is released when the osmotic pressure of the blood falls below a certain level. Oxytocin is released by, among other things, with stimulation nipples and by sexual intercourse. Oxytocin functions with a prolactin to stimulate milk secretion. Specifically, prolactin is involved in the actual manufacture of the milk, and oxytocin contracts the smooth muscles around the milk ducts, forcing milk out of the nipples or at least allowing it to flow more freely. It is sometimes poetically called milk letdown hormone. Oxytocin brings about contractions of the uterine muscles during labor. For once the baby is born, its suckling aids to producing oxytocin, which helps bring the distended uterus back down to its normal size. Oxytocin sometimes administered by obstetricians to stimulate uterine contractions if labor has been unusually protracted, and sometimes so the birth will fit the doctor's schedule. Apparently, the hormone increases the permeability of uterine myofibrils to calcium ions, an essential part of contraction process. Remember, calcium is a final signal for muscle contraction. Oxytocin, as was mentioned, also play a role in sexual activity. Its levels in the bloodstream of women rise dramatically during sex play and orgasm. When oxytocin levels rise following orgasm, the uterus begins to contract rhythmically, which may help draw in the sperm. Oxytocin levels also rise during menstruation, another time in which rhythmic uterine contractions occur. Sometimes these contractions are discernible as menstrual cramps. So far, all the known activities of oxytocin have to do with the female functions, although the hormone is found in males also. Oxytocin is playing a role in male reproduction. At ejaculation, a burst of oxytocin is released from the posterior lobe into the systemic circulation and stimulates contractions of the reproductive tract, aiding sperm release. There is a conclusive evidence that oxytocin is synthesized within the mammalian testes, epididymis, and prostate. Oxytocin has a role in stimulating contractivity of the seminiferous tubules, epididymis, and prostate gland. The other hormone of the posterior pituitary is antidiuretic hormone. The name antidiuretic hormone tells what the hormone does. A diuretic is something that increases the flow of urine, and an antidiuretic does the opposite. The target cells are epithelial cells of the collecting ducts of the kidneys, and the hormone is involved in water balance. Water conservation is one of the great problems of terrestrial life. The antidiuretic levels is influenced by the osmotic pressure of blood passing through the capillaries of hypothalamus. If the blood is too thick, the nerves fire, and antidiuretic hormone is released from the storage of the posterior pituitary. Accidentally, antidiuretic hormone was formerly known as vasopressin because it was shown to increase the blood pressure of laboratory animals. It was subsequently found not to have any such effect in humans, and so the name has been dropped. Some of you perhaps wondered, what are those structures above the pituitary gland? One of them is optic chiasma. This structure is crucial to vision, but we're not going to discuss vision in this lecture, so we'll leave it for another lecture. Another one called mammillary body. The mammillary bodies are paired structures, meaning there are two mammillary bodies, one on either side of the midline of the brain. They get their name because they were thought by early anatomists to have a breast-like shape. The mammillary bodies are best known for their role in memory, and they also involve in the sense of directions. Again, we'll leave this for another day. What we really want to talk about during today's lecture is hypothalamus. Oxytocin and antidiuretic hormones synthesized in the hypothalamus and then pass down along axons into a posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. Again, these are actually manufactured within neural cell bodies of hypothalamus itself, are transmitted down through the axon of these cells and are only stored in posterior pituitary, which can be stimulated to release them into blood. The posterior lobe of the pituitary originates in the embryo from the outpocketing of the great lobe, which is the developing forebrain. So the posterior lobe of the pituitary is actually part of the brain, while front anterior lobe of the pituitary is primary glandular tissue. Embryonically, it originates from outpocketing of the primitive mouth. It should be made clear that circulation through the posterior lobe of pituitary is separate from that of the anterior lobe of the pituitary. Since the pituitary actually controls the actions of many other endocrine glands, it is sometimes called the master gland. But if it does rule, it is a puppet government, as we shall see. In rather democratic manner, it responds to its constituents throughout the system of the checks and balances through the efficient biological process we call negative feedback control. In other words, the hormones of the pituitary activate other glands, which in turn send messages back that moderate the pituitary. The pituitary is also quite responsive to signals from other parts of the brain, in particular hypothalamus. Because of such responsiveness, the pituitary is part of a direct link between the nervous system and endocrine system. The hypothalamus not only manufactures hormones, it also produces substances called releasing factors that control the release of hormones from the anterior pituitary. The releasing factors are manufactured by secretory hormones in the hypothalamus and carried to the anterior pituitary through a portal system. To date, only 2 releasing factors have been discovered, and this release only 3 pituitary hormones. The thyroid stimulating hormone is released by the thyrotrophic hormone releasing factor, while the luteinizing hormone and the follicle stimulating hormone are both released by the luteinizing hormone releasing factor. The known releasing factors are only short chain of amino acids, but their discoveries represent years of intense effort by researchers. For example, in isolating thyrotrophic hormone releasing factor, 4 years of research and 2 million peak pituitaries were required for production of the first milligram. The reason for the substance was so hard to purify is that releasing factors are so enormously powerful that only incredibly tiny amounts are produced to do the job. The problem is compounded because the molecules fall apart soon after they are released. In spite of such problems, the tedious search for other releasing factors goes on. So much for the pituitary hormones. Now let's talk about another gland, the thymus. The thymus gland is located in the chest below the thyroid gland. The hormone produced by this gland is called thymosin. Thymosin is thought to help children to develop immune systems. The thymus gland is unusual because it is large in small children and becomes smaller in adults. The pancreas is found in the abdomen near the stomach. It produces enzymes that are used in digestion. These enzymes carried in a duct to the small intestine. The pancreas also contains areas of cell that are known as islets of Langerhans. The islets produce hormones that enter the bloodstream directly, insulin and glucagon. Insulin decreases the level of sugar in the blood by increasing the amount of sugar absorbed by body cells. I want to repeat this again. Insulin decreases the level of sugar in the blood by increasing the amount of sugar absorbed by body cells. Think of insulin as a doorman that opens a door for the sugar to enter a cell. Glucagon increases the level of blood sugar and lowers the amount of stored sugar. The correct balance of insulin and glucagon ensures that the level of sugar in the blood remains within the appropriate range. If a person lacks the correct amount of insulin, she or he develops diabetes. In this condition, there is a high level of sugar in the blood, and the cells of the body are being denied the sugar they need to produce energy. Hypoglycemia occurs when a person has too low level of sugar in the blood. Hypoglycemia is usually caused when too much insulin is produced. Type 1 diabetes is thought to be caused by autoimmune reaction. The body attacks itself by mistake. This reaction destroys the cell in the pancreas that make insulin. This process can go on for months or years before any symptoms appear. Some people have certain genes that make them more likely to develop type 1 diabetes. However, many of them will not go to have type 1 diabetes even if they have the genes. A trigger in the environment, such as virus, may also play a part in developing type 1 diabetes. Diet and lifestyle habits don't cause type 1 diabetes. The gonads are the glands responsible for producing gametes. The testes in males produce sperm. The ovaries in females produce eggs. In addition to reproduction of gametes, testes and ovaries produce hormones. The testes are located in scrotal sac and produce hormone testosterone. Testosterone produces male secondary sex characteristics, including the growth of facial hair, broadening of the chest, and developing of deepened voice. The ovaries are located in the female's internal pelvic region. The ovaries secretes estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen regulates the development of female secondary sex characteristic. Progesterone helps control female's monthly reproductive cycle. The pineal gland, also known as pineal body, is located deep inside the brain. The pineal gland's function in the body is not clearly understood yet. However, it is known to play a role in regulating female reproduction and sexual maturation. It is also has part in controlling circadian rhythms in the body's internal clock that affect such actions as when we wake and sleep. The cells of the pineal body, pinealocytes, produce melatonin, a hormone that helps maintain body's internal clock. Humans generally have higher levels of melatonin in childhood when progressively decrease within age. Usually, high melatonin levels have linked to delay sexual maturation. Melatonin also helps regulate female reproductive hormones, including when women menstruate. Now let's review some things that we discussed during today's lecture. When you're looking at the diagram above here, what does it point to? Pituitary gland, of course, right? So here we have a pituitary gland, also known as master gland. So as we learn, not such a master after all, right? What is the function of it? Hormones control, the hormones that produces pituitary gland, control growth, sexual maturation, and of course, kidney function. What is the next structure that this arrow points to here? How do we call this organ? Thyroid gland. Function of thyroid gland: makes thyroxine, which controls how fast cells change food to energy. In other words, it controls metabolism of the body. And what is there? Those yellow dots on the thyroid gland. You're correct if you say parathyroids. Functions of the parathyroids: make parathormone, which controls calcium in the body. Correct? Next, right there on top of the kidney, what do we see? Adrenaline gland. Correct. Function of the adrenaline gland: hormones control salt balance and functions needed for emergency. What is this structure right under the stomach? What organ we find there? Pancreas. Function: it makes insulin, which regulates how much glucose your body cells can take in. Well, besides this, it has other functions. We're talking now about endocrine gland functions specifically, right? We're talking about endocrine system. Of course, it makes 1,000 enzymes, right, that add to digestion of foods that we eat, which is very important. So it also plays important part in the system, in the digestion system of our body. Now, what do you see here? Name the area or name this gland here. Or is it a gland or what? Ovary. Forms hormones estrogen and progesterone that regulate female sexual maturation. Again, we specifically talk about endocrine functions, right? Because other functions that you already know, perhaps. The other one is testes. And what is endocrine function of the testes? Form testosterone that regulate male sexual maturation. Well, it also regulates what growth, we can say, because growth of the skeletal muscles and growth of the bones. So that would be a correct as well to say. The endocrine system plays many important roles in regulating the body's growth and development. Endocrinology is an important area of study as scientists continue to discover new hormones and further develop their understanding of our body functions and development.